So recording started, I hope. Okay, so this is kind of an overview of basically the broad ideas of the historical time periods of illumination. So if somebody says, oh, I like Gothic illumination, or I like Romanesque illumination, people who are new to illumination are like, what are you talking about? So this is kind of a broad overview. A couple of things to keep in mind. There really are no set divisions. So it's not like everybody stopped doing this style and started doing this style on this date. It was a learning from each other. Things kind of traveled from one place to another. One of the things I do in person is share some boards that I set up. So you can see here, I've kind of got it divided by time period and by country. So the green ones are Ireland, the purple ones are, I just forgot, French maybe, blue I think are English, Swiss, Italian, and so you can kind of see the interface or the interchange of ideas. So we'll take a little bit more of a look at that as well. But you can see how, you know, somebody in one country did something and then somebody else saw it and kind of copied it and then kind of gave it its own flair, and kind of changed around as they went. The other thing is, in any of these periods, your artists came in a range of talents. So you had your geniuses and you had your coloring book crayon level artists. So even if you're a terrible artist, it's period. So whether it's early on in a monastery, you might have an abbot who's going to go found a new monastery, so he's going to have his best artists do these couple of books, and then he's going to have the other guys who at least can write and draw something, do these books. Later on, during the Gothic period, if you went to Paris and you wanted to commission a book of hours, you could go look at the different artists. Most of us couldn't afford the Limburg brothers, but we might afford the guy on the corner who kind of sort of copied. One of the things I noticed in the last presentation in the C that he was showing us, if you looked at that center interlace piece, there are holes poked into it, because a common thing was to copy somebody else's. So one monk drew that, but another monk would borrow the book, take it apart, poke holes, and then pounce charcoal through it and wipe off the original, or something not quite as damaging as charcoal, and then use those dots to redraw. So those dots show that somewhere out in the world at that time there was a copy of that book, pretty close to exact because of that method of transfer. So plagiarism is period. It was perfectly fine. It was the highest form of compliment, was to have your work plagiarized. Somebody copied it, that meant that they thought it was absolutely amazing. So with that in mind, we start not from ground zero, because the world didn't start at the beginning of the Middle Ages. You can see and trace the classical influence. So if you look, even in the classical periods, you've got the not great artwork to the almost realistic artwork. And you'll see similar pieces to this fresco, things similar to this. A common thing that you'll see are the Acanthus leaves. These two are taken in Israel on the Sea of Galilee. This is from Wikipedia. But you can see these acanthus leaves. The acanthus really is a plant. No, the leaves don't look all that much like it, kind of. But you can see some of these. You've got, borders of circles, borders of arches and leaves. Here's a fresco. So the early Christian art, before the true Middle Ages during the Roman period, used the same art styles that you saw in the Roman. So whether this was a Christian being eaten by the lions or a Greek or Roman mythology story, the artwork stays the same. You see the same kind of poses. This is a little bit later. This is 6th century. This is 350 to 400 in Rome. You get you've got this naturalist posed kind of a look going on. It kind of transferred to this more rigid, posed iconography that the Byzantine used as well, which gets us into the Byzantine style, which was very iconic. So when we think of Byzantine art, we think about the icons, those board painted, or we think of the frescoes. They used a lot of flat gold backgrounds. So in this one, you can kind of see an attempt at a scenery behind him, and yet the sky or the world behind it is gold. Crystography is a fancy word for writing in gold, and you find a lot of gold ink. I'll teach a class later on gilding, but the earliest form of putting gold on paper was gold ink, powdered gold mixed with gum arabic turned into an ink, or mixed with glaire. Your quill dips in the gold ink and writes with it. So you see that a lot in the Byzantine. Here we've got, that's in the Sinai at St. Catherine's, a fresco. And then these are a 9th century and 12th century icon. Mary and John, Jesus's face, and these background thingies, those are 12th century. But you've got the gold background, you've got specific poses, but that look pretty realistic. Oh, skipped one. No, I didn't. So these are two manuscripts, 11th century and either 1291 or 1292. Oops, wrong page. So early 1200s, 1133. So the icons on wood and the icons on paper, pretty much the same techniques, the same poses. There was a kind of a set iconography. So certain people were always positioned in certain ways with certain objects. You see a lot of similarity there. So biblical scenes were always pictured the same way over and over. So you added your own artistic ability to it, and yet you knew what you were drawing. You also see in Byzantine work a lot of influence from the East. You've got the carpeting that you see in Arabic scrolls. And I'm only dealing with Europe. I'm not going down that rabbit hole. This one's deep enough. The Byzantine style continued in the East all the way through like the 1700s with, you know, artistic development. In Europe, thank you. The Celtic and Insular, now, when you look at different scholarly works on this, there are a lot of breakdowns. I'm just kind of touching on the top basic ones. So the Celtic turned into the Insular, which turned into the Anglo-Saxon, kind of shoving stuff together. So the Celtic, around 550 to 900, where you've got the Christianity coming to Ireland. Christianity was the religion of the book. It needed a book, the gospel book, in order to exist. And so everybody who went to bring the word brought the book. So we need a lot of Bibles. A lot of the big Bibles were meant to wow. So if you think about like the Book of Kells, if you were a missionary and you were going off to a part of Ireland that hadn't been Christianized yet, you would want this big fancy book that you could hold open in front of the people, and they would go, wow, that's amazing. God must be great. Let's learn about Christianity. So they were meant to impress. They would have used not whole Bibles as much, but gospel books would have been the primary book. Psalms would have also been an important thing. That especially comes later in the monasticism. Christian writers of the time would have been also very important. One of the things that the Celtic starts doing is, this is a letter. The artwork is used to create letters that integrate into the script. So it's not just a picture on the previous page, although some of them are like the pictures in the Book of Kells of the gospel writers. But you've got this idea of decorating the first initial of a book leading into the text. So the text itself is worth the decoration. It used metalwork style of the period, which I'll show you in a second, which was a lot of abstract knotwork. It was inhabited, so we call that anthropomorphic or zoomorphic, depending on if it's animals or people that are creating these knotwork pieces. Sometimes they were ambiguous or abstract, you can't tell what they were. This particular style is also called Hiberno Saxon art, just, you know, if you needed some more information. So here's some examples of, this is the Terra Brooch, and this is from the Sutton Hoo discovery. You can see that same kind of knotwork that you see. So they knew how to do it. It was familiar to them. It was something they loved, so they went with it. So here you see that same kind of knotwork. These are initials, the chiral going into the actual words. And so you see large initials with a great deal of work, large capitals with some work, and then it'll go into pages of just plain text. So this is the Lindisfarne Gospels, done in the British Isles. This is from St. Gall, Switzerland. Well, it looks awfully Irish to me. Well, the reason for that is that the Irish monks are the ones who Christianized or were missionaries to most of Europe. So it's kind of ironic, when I lived in Germany near Würzburg, the patron saint of Würzburg, Germany, is St. Kilian, who was martyred because he told the queen that she wasn't doing what she should have been doing. So these are from Italy, but you can kind of see the resemblance to the Book of Kells. So some of the northern Italian monasteries were also founded by Irish monks. So they learned how to do it in Italy, and yet this guy, doesn't he look a lot like the guy at the very beginning from the Roman fresco? So you definitely see an interweaving of artistic styles, some for the better, some for the worse. This is another example of the insular Anglo-Saxon getting there, but you still see the Celtic knotwork. So this is called a canon table. At the beginning of the Gospels, it shows you the correlation between the four Gospels and what's where, which story is where, and so forth. So the Anglo-Saxon style moved a bit away from the Irish. So between 550 and 900 we call the insular, 900 to 1066 is Anglo-Saxon-ish. It was divided into two styles, the Winchester style and the Utrecht style. Winchester had richer colors. It was influenced by the Carolingian, which hadn't quite happened yet, but was going to get there. The Utrecht was more classical. I love these pieces with just the colored outline. I think it's really stunning. So we've got an interesting thing. There's a good book on English, where did it go? English Illumination, and you can download it online or you can buy it, and it's over on the shelf somewhere, which of course I can't find when I think about it. Anyway, that goes into a lot of detail. It's interesting to look at the drapery here on her and the almost hunchbacked pose. I'm not sure your head actually goes that far over. You see that a lot in the English, in the Anglo-Saxon style. You see the, once again, colored. This one's interesting because it's got a filled in colored border, and yet this is a little bit later, but you can kind of see the connection. This one's from the 11th, and this is 1310. Here's a good example of some work from a Winchester Bible. Here you've got a combination. So these two pieces are in the same Bible, or all three actually. So you've got just the outline, and then you've got something that's more colored, more painted in. Moving on to the next. Some more canon tables here. This is the Burri Gospel from the 11th century. This is the Ramsey Psalter from the 10th century, the 4th quarter. but you can see how we've kind of got that initial, we've got it elaborate. Now we've got the beginnings of acanthus going on, but we also have knotwork. So we've got these styles merging together. So the Carolingian, a little bit before Anglo-Saxon, came about when Charlemagne set up his court, and he was a big one into learning, hired Alcuin the monk as his scribe. This is where we get the Carolingian minuscule font that you see here. He wanted something that was able to be read internationally and anywhere. Still a lot of church books, but we're also now getting into more imperial and aristocratic books, books for people who want things. Oops, I lost something here. It was a very classical style. He considered himself the Holy Roman Emperor, so he was looking back at Roman artwork again. There were several different schools, so in some areas you see some trends more than others. This is from St. Gall. This is the Golden Psalter from 833 to 888, somewhere in there. But you definitely see the influence of the Celtic Irish monks and their knotwork. You see here in the Carolingian some attempt at three-dimensional happening, as well as just your two-dimensional. These are the Harley Gospels. So my modern eye thinks, well, that's not very impressive. And yet my modern eye goes, oh my gosh. On this one, this 9th century, either Saxony or France, and this one is from the 6th century in Italy. This is called a carpet page, where you've got the whole page just covered with decoration, a couple of little words there, but you've got a blending going on. You've got the classical, very classical Roman looking, and then the very insular Irish coming together. This one is from 9th century France. Here's another canon table, both from 9th century France. Here you see kind of the archwork of the Roman, but then you've got the attempt at knotwork and the funky animals from the Celtic. And it looks to me from here, with my glasses on, that that's also Celtic minuscule writing. And yet the next one, look how Roman that looks, or actually Greek. So that's a 9th century French, and this is the same book with your very Celtic looking. So you, throughout history, you've kind of got this, oh, well, I like the canon table from this one, and I like the carpet page from this one, so will you make me one that has this and that, and we'll put them together. This is a sacramentary from St. Denis. Does that not blow your mind? 9th century French, between 843 and 877. The Ottonian, so Otto was Charlemagne's son, and then his son Otto married a Byzantine princess, Theophano. She brought with her a lot of the Byzantine influence. So the Ottonian takes a lot of the Carolingian, adds in some Byzantine elements. Like the Byzantine, they loved a lot of gold. They went for the purple pages, the dyed vellum. You've got the very iconic illustrations. Now we've got the same knotwork, but in gold. I love those. And coloring in the background a bit. Here you can see they're trying, their beginnings of attempting three-dimensional, not always very successful. Here you've got very Celtic-y looking, but with a modern twist. So this is 1030 and this is the late 900s. St. Gall is a rabbit hole best to be avoided unless you have an entire summer to spend, because they've got tons of this amazing gold and silver. Side note, it is a royal pain to gild in gold and silver, because gold sticks to silver and silver sticks to gold and gold sticks to silver and silver sticks to gold and so forth. I did a piece with both colors, and some of the things had like 6 layers of different gilding because they kept sticking to each other. This one's from 895 and 900. Here we've got Acanthus, tying back to that Roman, from 10th century Germany. And this one is 11th century France. So you've got the darkened parchment areas. You've got the knotwork, but moving into acanthus and knotwork and little people running through things, which gets us to the Romanesque style. So sort of late 11th century, late 12th century, more continental Europe. During this period in England, they were still kind of in that Anglo-Saxon art style. The Romanesque is considered an international style. It wasn't limited to a certain country. You've got a lot of large Bibles, large missals, things that were meant to be put in front of a group of monks. You've got the monasticism growing and moving, so we need a lot of big things. You've got a lot of biblical commentaries, lives of the saints, theological works, and a lot of them were very large. Still, predominantly the books that you see from that time period are religious works, but you do see, contrary to what you would expect, the monks made copies of a lot of the classical works, which is why we still have them today. The scrolls with Greek and Roman books and so forth were copied by monks, and they all wanted to feel like they had all of the knowledge of the world, so they made copies when they set up new monasteries. There's a definite sense of humor starting in the Romanesque that gets pretty outrageous in the next period. You've got zoomorphic initials, so initials that have animals swirled up into the letters, people that are letters, gymnastics that are kind of moving and weaving and bobbing. We get inhabited initials, so it's an initial of probably vine work with people in them, and then historiated initials later on, which tell stories, and we'll look at that. The mannered people, now this one is very mannered, it's very iconographic, very stiff. It's going to become more natural, but we still have that iconography going on. The drapery is also interesting. If you think back to the Anglo-Saxon drapery that was very fluid, this is almost stiff. And then we start seeing bestiaries and herbals as popular books, which are highly entertaining. All right, so this is 1180 Germany and 1153 in Monte Cassino. So you've got a lot of gold. This has the red inkwork on top of the gold, just to make it look even better. We still are fancying up initials, and they're place markers. So this P and this Q and their text are the beginning of another section. So the way you would find the next section in your book is by looking for something big and bold. They also used colored ink for letters. That makes them also pop up. And this red is where we get the word rubricated. So this, when we talk about a rubric or rubricated, it comes from this idea of the red letters, or if we talk about a red letter day in the calendar, the ones with red letters were special. But you also see here an example of the continuation of Crystography, although at this point the Crystography may very well be using your quill to write in the size, the base of your gold leaf, and then putting gold leaf over that to create the letters. So not as much with the gold ink as with writing with the size and then gilding it. This, let's see, whoops. Where did I go? There we go. Okay, these are both in the same book from Monte Cassino, which are quite interesting contrasting styles. Very classical, leafy vine work, knotted confusion. We've got inhabited initials. This is a D. This is an A. This is from 1025 to 1050 in Fulda or Mainz, Germany. This is the Stomheim Missile. This is the one I did with gold and silver, God help us, from Hildesheim in the 1170s. So they're inhabited by all kinds of crazy stuff. These are the same two books, but you've got kind of Anglo-Saxonish looking carpet page, and then more Byzantine Irish effect. Then we get to the Gothic, which can be divided up into lots of different pieces and parts, but I'm just going to call them all Gothic. So 12th to 16th century in some places. The Renaissance starts in the 14th century in some places, never gets to some places, so forth. We have a lot of Book of Hours. So the monks prayed the hours using the Liturgy of the Hours. Lay people really didn't have that kind of time, and so they came up with the Beata Maria Virginis, the Hours of Our Lady or Blessed Virgin. And so lay people would want to carry around a Book of Hours that they would pray 6 times a day. Highly decorated, beautiful things, a wide range. If you were a noble person, you probably had one or more than one. If you were a wealthy merchant, in order to show off how wealthy you were, you'd get a Book of Hours, preferably with lots of gold and lapis lazuli. People also liked the Book of Revelation or the Apocalypse. We also have the growth of romances in the vernacular. So romances are the stories in the local language, Romance of the Rose, Romance of Alexander, things like that. The growth of colleges, the universities, meant more people needed books. So the production went from 2 or 3 monks in a monastery or a scribe who does cover to cover the whole book. Now we've got, in cities like Paris, you have a whole street full of parchmenters that make the parchment, and then you'd have a whole street full of scribes. You'd have a whole street full of book merchants that would contract with the scribes and the illuminators and the gilders and the binders. And so you would go to somebody and say, okay, I want this part of the book about, I want the, Hours of the Blessed Virgin, plus I want the Hours of the Holy Spirit, and the Hours of the Dead, please, and a litany with these saints, and a calendar with these saints. I want it with this kind of illumination here, and I want this picture on this page. There was a standard, this is usually here, 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 and here, but it wasn't always followed. The sense of humor gets a bit out of control. We got grotesques. Many of these books were very elegant. You see a development in the interest in landscape and perspective with some humorous results. So starting early, this is about 1170, you see the inhabited or the vinework initials start becoming more complex. This has beautiful tooled gilding. So this is probably raised gilding, and then they've cut or pressed designs into the gold. So now it's not just a shiny flat mirrored surface, but reflecting a lot of light. This is the Winchester Bible. Terrible pictures out of a book. Sorry about that. Kind of Anglo-Saxon, but also maybe Gothic. Sometimes it's hard to figure out where stuff fits. Could also be transitional. Now we've got historiated initials, where here's your capital P, but now you've got a story that usually ties into the text here. This is one, if you hear about things with gloss, this here and interlinear is gloss. It's commentary. It's somebody taking notes, and you can see it here too. This, I think, is a translation in between the lines, and then somebody's commentary down the side. This is 1150, and this is second half of the 12th century from England. But still going on in Ireland in the 11th century. This is the Irish Gothic, which looks an awful lot like the Carolingian. So not every country was at the same point, at the same place. Bestiaries are a blast. Some of the misinformation out there is highly entertaining. Now this represents a new type of book that then requires a new type of art. So we're no longer copying the same picture over and over, but adding our artistic styles. Now we're creating our own artwork, but you can still see that somebody probably looked at somebody's bestiary and went, ooh, I really like that. I'm going to copy this part. You still have boxes. So these are miniatures now adding to our palette. Grotesques. Yeah. So up until now, most of the illumination has tied into the text. So when we've got our bestiary, this is what this text is about. When we've got our historiated initial, it ties into this text. Now we're just getting crazy in the margins. So I don't think this text here has anything to do with preparing a feast. We also have these decorative bars to fill up the lines. So the scribe went through and did the writing. Somebody else then went through and did all the fancy capital initials. Then the illuminator just fills in all the blank spaces. So blank is bad. We want to fill it all up with something pretty. So this is the Latrell Psalter, and this is, I forgot, it's 12th, 13th century. So we start with these capital letters that are intricate, then they start flowing down the sides, and now they're actually flowing around the page and getting inhabited by what we call marginalia, some of which makes no sense. This is where we get, you know, the little bunny rabbits shooting people and poking bunnies and whatever. So these are both 13th century. This one's English, this one's French. Again, 13th century, both French. The capital letter needs to be wherever it needs to be for the text. And so we just take the vine work out and around. This is what's growing into the bar and vine idea, filled with drolleries, funny things, birds and bunnies, little jousting knights. This guy is shooting a bird. Some of it is inappropriate, but I'm not going to go there. Next page. This one, we start seeing what are called diaper work backgrounds. So filling in the background of a space. You still see the gold background from the Byzantine, but now we're filling in the background with diaper work, which is lots of little squares. Here we've got, it's bar and kind of vine. So we're surrounding the page, but it's all still attached to the capital letter, wherever the capital letter needs to be. Although sometimes in this case, it's a little more separate. Here we've got nice bar and vine and flower work. This is the Psalter of Yolande de Soissons from 1290, and this is 1400s. They're not sure where it came from, but I think it's pretty cool. So we have, some books have a single column of text, sometimes you have books with several columns of text, sometimes even 3 or more. This is what we really think about as bar and vine work. We've got these nice bars colored in that form the outside, still usually connected to a capital letter somewhere. This one I love is the Buckland Missile. It's got these great dragons, if you're a fan of dragons, from 1370 or 80. This one's a little earlier, 1310. This one also has some entertaining. Here's David and Goliath. I can't remember what that picture is. This, whoops. I keep losing my place here. All right, so this is the Delisle Hours from York from 1316 and the Dubois Hours from 1325. Here you've got, you know, your animals and then some kind of a half humanish thing. A lot of times they would put the coat of arms in. A lot of half people growing out of things. Here you've got some little people down here. This idea of a surrounding border, if you look back at some of the older stuff, we had those square borders. Now we're just getting ultra fancy. So this is the Berthold Sacramental from Germany from 1215 with a very architectural beginning border that's very similar to some of the older stuff, but you can see how we're taking these same ideas now and putting in a roof line of sorts, sometimes with columns and pillars. This is the Psalter Hours of Yolande de Soissons. And this is the same artist, the Psalter Hours of St. Louis, done 30 years beforehand, with very much architectural. This one from England from 1225, so a little bit earlier. but we've got that idea that we took from the old pieces of this square border, and now we're adding a new twist to it. Things start to get more realistic, or at least an attempt. Here's a pretty example of the diaper work pattern. This is the Queen Mary Psalter and the Belleville Breviary. This one is 1310 England, 1323 Paris. We start now getting the names of artists. So Jean Poussel was the artist who did that one. He's one of the names to know. We also see this like graphic novel or comic strip kind of miniatures, where you have several, instead of just one big picture, now we have several pictures that tell a story. This is from the Morgan Crusader Bible, so it's a new kind of Bible. It's a picture Bible. So it doesn't have the entire Bible, but it's got stories from the Bible with pictures illustrating it. Pretty cool looking. This is the Romance of Alexander, so one of the early romances. They play with perspective quite a bit and not always getting things right. This, yeah, Jehan de Gries is another of the names to know. This is the Romance of Alexander. The Flemish area started really becoming a hotbed for great artists, innovation in art. This is a Romance of Alexander from 1338. And it's just amazing. The diaper work, the detail, the attempted, well, yeah, that's an interesting attempt. This is Romance of the Rose from 14th century France. More fancy diaper work comes in all kinds of different flavors. This is the Hour of Jean de Navarre, 1336. This is another famous artist, Jean Lenoir. This is a Breviary d'Amour, so it's one of the romances. This is from Spain, from 14th century Spain. But you can see the tie-ins of how these ideas are moving from one place to another, but they're doing it with their own style. Here we've got Bourdichon, one of the big names. This is a Book of Hours from Tours from 1480. Here you have the bar and vine dropping the bar. This one kept the bar, but now it's a whole lot more vine work. This is a very lightweight, earlier Gothic kind of vine work, but now we're getting more acanthusy, and our acanthus now starts getting other flowers. So it's more of a garden. We're not quite to the trompe l'oeil, the trick the eye, Renaissance style, but we're moving in that direction. So this is a lot more realistic. You wouldn't expect to see that on a plant anywhere. You can see as it continues, this is Robinet Testard, one of my favorites. I've done this border a couple of times. Looks kind of like flowers set on the page, not really trying to look realistic, but you get the idea. I like the little archer in here. We have some new kind of books, some hunting books, and some treatises on different things. This is a treatise on the vices, and the Book of the Hunt by Gaston Phoebus. So now we've got new books, we've got to create new art. So this doesn't look like most of the other stuff we've seen. This is 1330 to 1340, but now we're just decorating the page. Here we've kind of got that bar and vine, but it's not connected to the capital letter. It's just pretty, and a nice illumination of the hunt. We're still technically, maybe sort of kind of in the Gothic, but we're definitely taking two giant steps into the Renaissance. You've got this trompe l'oeil, this trick the eye. This is a Book of Hours from Rouen in 1500. This is a Book of Hours from England in 1440 or 1450. So we're kind of tying in those elements that we saw before. We're just giving them a new spin. We're trying this, it looks like I've got stuff scattered all over the page look. This one's pretty neat. They're trying to look like the statues on the cathedrals, which would have been in niches. Yeah, they're working on the whole perspective thing, but they've not got that figured out yet. even, now these are considered Gothic, but oh my goodness, these are your like geniuses. These are the Limburg brothers. This is the Grimaldi Breviary. Most people would probably consider this, because it's Italian, Renaissance, 1490, 1510, somewhere in there. This was almost 100 years before, 1412 to 1416, but these guys were geniuses. They're really making a dent in the idea of perspective, although it's still funky. So the Renaissance, mid 14th century to mid 16th century, depending on where you were. So Italy is where it started, so mid 14th century, a lot of that would be considered Renaissance. It doesn't get up to England until much later. We've got a big shift. Yes, the church is still requiring books, but people want books. We want devotional books. We want historical books. They're recopying the great Roman and Greek works. We want all that literary work. The advances in panel painting are now showing up on paper. And you have a crossover. There was, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, there's an illuminated or parchment sketch of a young lady that turned out to be out of a manuscript, and it's by Da Vinci. So he did a charcoal, red and black charcoal drawing of a young lady that was put into a book of hours when she married, that was later cut out and framed and hung. And they put all those pieces together. So you've got some of the artists going back and forth and working on panels and working on parchment, whatever they're commissioned to do. So we've definitely got a lot more of the humanism. It's a lot more realistic looking. We're returning to classical motifs, and that'll make sense in a minute. But it's certainly a lot more realistic and naturalistic. We also have now printed books on paper. We have, if you couldn't quite afford somebody to write out your book of hours, you could buy a book of hours without the illumination, take it to an illuminator. He could then add the decoration, or you could buy one that had woodblock print pictures, then have someone color them in. So here we've got, they're both 15th century. This is French and this is Italian, no, Flemish, sorry. So you can see the attempt. This one is trying for the realistic. This one's not quite working on that yet. So the borders now are not attached to the letters. The letters are usually as needed elaborated, but not part of the borders. Same thing here, another book of hours. An antiphoner, this one kind of, but not really connected. This is pretty impressive. More artists, we've got Taddeo Crivelli. So this is a very Renaissance. These things here are called squash bugs. I'll let you imagine how they got started.
Give you a note, your 10-minute mark.
Thank you. So lots of raised gilding, lots of floral elements. This is what's called white vine work, all 15th century pieces. An imaginary, going back to the Roman, because the Roman really didn't do this, but you see a lot of these gilded letters with white vines against a background usually of blue, green, and pink, sometimes faded as we go. The white vine work can extend all the way around, or you can have these fancy filled in French borders. So this is, they're both 15th century, but this is Italian and this one's French. So the interest in France never quite got the vine work. That was very Italian. Again, we've got paintings that could be on a panel. This is the Sforza Hours from the Netherlands, 16th century. And the Golf Book by Simon Benning, another famous name. And a book of hours, this is Burgundian. And this is the Borso d'Este Bible. So you can see the realistic, like that could be on a fresco of an Italian villa with no problem. And you've got this kind of floral gold dot border as well. Here you've got more scenes around the pages. And finally a beautiful, the Meyer Vondenberg Breviary. It's Flemish from 1510. You've kind of got the architectural elements here that we saw back with Yolande de Soissons and the other Bibles or Book of Hours, but now you've got beautiful paintings around the sides. So let's look at the pictures here. So you can kind of see, I like how this kind of shows you've got like these square borders in Ireland leading to the square borders in France. There we go. So these are in that Google Slides thing, so you can kind of browse through I tried to take pictures that didn't glare too much, but it was kind of hard. But it's kind of neat to kind of trace the elements of art through the different periods. You can see, so these are all in chronological order, so that you can see how things kind of tie together, going from the heavier vine work to the really fine vine work, and how some styles got stuck in one period or another. So you can compare, you know, if you look at, here's the Limburg brothers compared to what was going on in the world around them at that time, you can see, wow, they're amazing. You know, even more artistic than some of this stuff, comparable to, you know, this down here. So you kind of get this wave of learning. But like I said at the beginning, you know, if you had your grandmother's Book of Hours and it was all very acanthus-y, and you went to the book contractor and said, okay, I want a Book of Hours, but I really love my grandmother's, so can you put that in here? But can you, you know, put some architectural borders because my grandfather had that in his, it was really cool, or, you know, my neighbor had that, so can you do some of that? So you would have gotten quite a variety of what you wanted, different artistic styles, sometimes in the same book. So that's kind of an overview. I hope that makes some sense. It's kind of fast and furious, but hopefully it helps. Any questions?
Thank you. That was very enjoyable.
I
I enjoyed your presentation very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to make that up. The one thing I would love to have seen, because sometimes I can't always hear as well as I'd like, in your PowerPoint, it would be nice to have the names of the books or on the illustrations.
They
that
are
would be a suggestion.
in the notes. Let me share.
Okay.
So if you look at the, I hid them for this. They're all down there.
Okay.
Not all of them, but yeah, I'm a school teacher, so that kind of, they don't all have the annotations, but they should. I'll work on that some more. Some of them were things that I had cut and pasted years ago, but I tried to put that, just because your brain can't handle all that all at once, too much. A really good website, if you check the British Library, they've got really good resources on the history as well.
Can you remember the name of the book you mentioned, an English book that can be downloaded on English Illumination?
It's called English Manuscript. Aha, got it. English Illuminated Manuscripts by Sir Edward Maunde Thompson.
M-O-N? Maunde Thompson?
M-A-U-N-D-E. I'm holding it up to the screen.
Okay, thank you so much. I'd like to take a look at that.
Yeah, very, very interesting. It's old. It's like the 1920s or something.
If you hold it back up to the screen, I spotlighted you so people can see it closer.
There we go.
Nice.
Is that forwards or backwards?
It's forwards. I can read it.
Okay.
And it says 1805 on it? 1895?
1895, yep. but it's interesting reading.
Mhm.
And then there's a series of books. I don't have any of them upstairs. They're all downstairs. The gold series of books on Illumination, different periods. The French one especially, I really enjoyed reading. It talks a lot about how students copied from their masters and shows examples of the same face in one manuscript, and then the face is slightly altered in another manuscript because copying happened. I did 2 pieces from the Manasseh Codex, and I was having trouble tracing one of the faces, so I took the other face, and it's exactly the same, just turned. So, you know, they had ways of tracing, so they didn't have to redraw everything. So it's pretty cool.
Thank you.
I may have the PDF for English illuminated manuscripts. If I can, I will stick it in that Google Drive folder. I'll have to go hunting for it.
That would be terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And then on the handout, there's a list of websites not even close to exclusive of dangerous places not to go unless you have lots of time to sit and get sucked into looking at pretty pictures.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Oh.
See you in the next one.
Oops.